Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our live session today. My name is Larissa. I'm an event planner at Reactor, joining you from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Before we start, I have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. The session is being recorded and will be available to view on demand here on the Reactor YouTube channel within 48 hours. Keep an eye on the chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer, as well as our moderators in the chat. I'll now turn it over to our host for today. So please welcome Killian.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Ask the Expert session on how do you optimize your Microsoft Fabric spend. Thank you so much for joining. I'm your host, Killian Mitchell, and I also have an awesome group of experts joining me later today. But before I introduce them, both on camera and also in the chat, I do want to actually spend some time just going over some of the basic concepts on Fabric Capacities, one-leg storage, and a whole bunch of other things that we're going to talk about today. So we'll spend the first 10 minutes or so going over, Fabric Capacities, the different tools you have to manage those capacities. And then we'll spend the majority of our time, those 50 minutes, just answering all of your questions. So I see some of you already putting in your questions in the chat. Thank you, Prachi. But please, if you have any questions related to Fabric Capacities, just pop them in the chat at any point while I'm talking. I'll go back through the chat and bring them up and start asking those questions to our panelists so you can answer them live. You'll also have people in the chat. If for whatever reason we don't answer them live, the folks in the chat will help answer them as well. So with that being said, let's start going over some of the kind of basic concepts of Fabric and how we designed its licensing. And when we initially designed how Fabric Capacities and licensing overall would work, the goal was to keep it as simple as humanly possible for admins. Like typically, when you're running your different analytics and you have a different product or solution for every single part of that data journey, you'd have to manage different pricing, business models, capacities for every single workload you have or every single job you have. And so with Fabric, we try to simplify, as I said. And so now there's only really two variables you have to worry about. The first is compute, which runs every single capability we have in Fabric. And the second is storage. And so with compute, you basically just purchase one capacity that powers all of the different Fabric capabilities you have, from Copilot and Fabric to data agents, to your data science, to your data engineering, to your real-time intelligence. All of it runs on your Fabric capacities, which is obviously not only easier to manage, but helps make sure that that capacity isn't sitting idle, right? If your data science team isn't necessarily using your capacity, well, your data engineering team is. And so it helps kind of make sure that it's being used more effectively throughout the day. You can also purchase this capacity either as a pay-as-you-go monthly fee, or you could save about 44%, which is massive if you go with the 1-year reservation. And for storage, it's a pretty simple, just pay-as-you-go model based on how much data you have on a gigabyte per month basis. And so, how does this actually work, right? As you might already know, you can purchase what are called capacity units. So for example, if you have an F-64, you get 64 capacity units. And those CUs represent the compute power that's needed to run different queries or jobs or tasks. And so depending on the job that you're running, right, Fabric will consume those CUs at different rates basically on the compute power that's needed to run that job. And the actual consumption is then translated into C usage just based on a 30-second evaluation period. But there are also some tools that we have in Fabric to help you optimize this capacity usage and hopefully just simplify managing these capacities as well. And the two big ones we have is what we call bursting and what we call smoothing. And bursting allows you to consume extra compute resources but beyond what you've purchased to speed up the execution of a job or a workload. So for example, if I purchase an F-64 and I'm running a task that would normally take 60 seconds with 64 CUs, I can just automatically use 250 CUs to complete that in 15 seconds. And bursting is not like something you turn on necessarily for a specific job. it just turns on automatically and helps make sure that, things that you're running in Fabric complete quicker, even if you haven't purchased that highest end CUs. At the same time, we have something called smoothing. And if you're managing Fabric capacities, smoothing is something that you'll know well. But essentially, smoothing flattens your compute usage over time. And so it helps disperse that usage over a 24-hour period, which is better for you because you can purchase your Fabric SKU more based on your average usage rather than just those like specific peaks throughout the day. And interactive jobs are smoothed over 5 minutes, but those background jobs are smoothed over the full 24 hours. So, even if you don't necessarily, you're not like working at 2 a.m., you still might actually have usage at 2 a.m. just based on those background jobs being flattened over the entire time. The other tool that we have that a lot of folks are now using is called surge protection, which is actually now generally available. So definitely go ahead and start using it. But it helps protect your capacity from those unexpected surges in background consumption. So with surge protection, you can set limits on how much your capacity, capacity your background jobs can consume, preventing them from starting when that limit is reached and potentially getting throttled. And actually, speaking of throttling, I do think it's probably helpful to kind of dive into how throttling works, because a lot of what we're here to talk about today is how do you make sure that your capacities aren't throttled and your workloads aren't affected. So throttling occurs when your capacity has consumed more CPU resources than you've purchased, right? And so after the consumption is smoothed over time, right, we've taken that smoothing into account, those capacity throttling policies are then checked based on the amount of future capacity that is being consumed by whatever job that you're running, either interactive or background. And if your capacity does enter that throttle state, you've used more capacity than you've consumed more capacity than you purchased. It really only affects operations that have begun after that throttling. So if you're running a mission critical job before it, that won't be affected, but anything else after might be. And so there's really kind of 4 stages to think about when it comes to throttling. The first is obviously stage 0, where no throttling is being applied, and that's hopefully where you're at 99% of the time. But then we get to stage 1, and if you've used all of your CUs for the next 10 minutes, then those interactive jobs are delayed by about 20 seconds. So it's not hugely punitive, but just telling you basically, hey, you've used most of your capacity already. Then you get into stage 2. So if your CUs if you use all the CUs for the next hour, those interactive jobs are rejected, but those important background jobs will continue to run. And then if you've used all of your CUs for the next 24 hours, your capacity is frozen until all of that CU is paid off. So you can see, and stage 4 is pretty rare too, I will call out. But you can see how surge protection might be helpful, right? Especially in stage 3, where those background jobs are continuing to run. You could set limits on those background jobs so you don't overload your capacity with a ton of background jobs running at once. Also love all the questions coming in the chat. Please keep them coming. I'll go back through them later on. So just fire off any questions you have, whether it's related to throttling, surge protection, smoothing and bursting. I know is sometimes pretty confusing. So please ask those questions. All right. One other topic I want to hit on too is Copilot and Fabric, because this is a big one when it comes to thinking about your capacity. Copilot and Fabric works just like any other workload or job in Fabric. You don't necessarily have to purchase a separate SKU. I know that's pretty common at Microsoft and other companies where you kind of purchase an add-on. This one just runs on your existing CUs. And we also wanted to make Copilot as accessible as possible. So we've made a few changes over the last couple months. One of the big ones is that we decided that over the last couple years, the consumption rate for Copilot and Fabric has dropped dramatically thanks to much more efficient AI models. So if you've tested Copilot and Fabric in the past and you were concerned about those high usage rates for Copilot and Fabric, I would highly encourage you to just test it again because those consumption rates have gone down about 70%. And that's part of the reason that we decided to also expand Copilot to all of the SKUs. So whether it's no longer at that F-64 limit anymore, You can now run Copilot on your F2, your F4, your F8, no matter what it is, you can run it. And again, that's in part because the consumption rate has lowered so much that it doesn't really take over your capacities anymore. So again, I highly recommend trying Copilot and Fabric, again, if you're concerned about that in the past. And if you're still concerned about that, there is also an additional setting we've launched called Copilot Capacity. And that allows you, if you have multiple capacities, to direct all of your Copilot consumption and billing to a specific capacity, no matter where that usage is actually taking place. So you can assign specific members of your organization. Say I'm using a lot of Copilot in Power BI that I want to use. I can assign, just like me, to a specific capacity that I have for all my Copilot requests. And then those requests will be consumed and billed on whatever capacity you've assigned them to, so it doesn't affect those priority jobs. So for example, say I wanted to use Copilot and Fabric on a workspace, but that capacity is supporting my most mission critical jobs that I absolutely cannot have affected by throttling in any way. Well, I might worry that my Copilot and Fabric usage on that workspace would cause too much consumption and might impact those jobs. Now I can just assign all my Copilot usage to, say, an F8 that I know, that I don't care that much about in terms of it's not running any of my mission critical jobs. And if I use up all my SKUs in that state in Copilot, again, it doesn't impact my priority jobs. So it's a great way of still getting access to Copilot and Fabric without that worry that it would potentially consume too many resources. Another question we often get asked is, okay, how do I actually think about, with Fabric Capacity running all the different workloads we have in Fabric, from RTI to Power BI to data engineering, how do I estimate how much, what kind of SKU I need? And we do have a number of tools for you to help you identify the right capacity. We have Andreas joining us on the panel later on, and a bunch of folks in the chat who I know worked on this, the new online SKU estimator. And this is a really good place, a really good starting place to identify what SKU you might need. You just plug in some of the workloads you're going to use, the scale at which you expect to use them, and then it will provide a pretty good estimate of what SKU you should consider using based on your requirements. Another way to kind of test it out would be to use the Fabric free trial, and then you can use the Capacity Metrics app to monitor and evaluate your usage. And if you're able to replicate kind of the usage you think you'll run on your trial, it's probably the most accurate way to understand what kind of SKU you might need. And then finally, if you've done the SKU estimator, you've done the trial and the Capacity Metrics app, you have a pretty good sense. Well, you can work with your Microsoft reps and partners. They have this very granular tool that we developed where you can go kind of step by step, every single workload, exactly what scale you think you're going to need, how many people in your organization are using Fabric, and they can give you a very accurate sense of what SKU size you need. But again, I would start with, definitely start with step one, just use that online SKU estimator. And as you get further down the process, try the trial and then work with your Microsoft reps and partners. And we can definitely find you a SKU that works. And if you need to upgrade your SKU to a higher SKU at any point, it's relatively easy, so you can always do that as well. And speaking of the Capacity Metrics app, this is kind of the last slide before I start answering your questions. So, sorry about the delay, but hopefully these slides have kind of helped prompt some of those questions as well. We have this thing called the Capacity Metrics app, which is a single place to monitor all of your different capacities and usage. And the app provides insights into your capacity consumption so that you can make kind of better decisions about how to actually use those capacity resources. You can see kind of who's using what workloads they're using. It could help you identify, when you might need to scale up your capacity. And we've released a ton of new features into the Capacity Metrics app recently, like chargeback reporting, historical analysis, and that time point drill. All right, with that, I think it's time to bring our panel of experts back onto the screen so that they can introduce themselves And then again, we have a bunch of folks in the chat like Christopher, Paul, Joy, Pankaj, all here to answer your questions. So with that, I might start with you, Opie. Do you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Opie Aladikoma. I am a group program manager here at Microsoft. Specifically, I lead the Fabric Capacities team. I'll hand it over to Łukasz.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be with you today. My name is Łukasz Pawłowski. I'm a program manager here on the Fabric Capacities team as well. I'll hand it to Andreas.
Cool. My name is Andreas Bergstedt. I work for a pre-sales organization called Global Black Belts in the data and analytics space. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you all for being here. I do want to start with Prachi. She put her question in before it even started. So thank you so much for doing that. The question is, does the Fabric Metrics app include CU consumption for hosting consumption as well? And Opie, I might send that over to you, or Łukasz, feel free to jump in.
Sure. So I saw that a lot of people try to answer the question in the chat. I'm making the assumption that hosting consumption here refers to the consumption for hosting operations. So assuming that's the context, then the answer is yes. So typically when you go in the Capacity Metrics app, you can be able to see hosting consumption. It typically refers to the compute that we use to serve you content. So things like rendering your reports, dashboards, semantic models, especially when you're, this can be accessed interactively by a user who's using Fabric Capacity Metrics app. So these are considered interactive operations, and you should be able to track the usage on the app itself. Let me pause and see if anybody wants to add more to it.
I think I want to add, so I've seen this question bouncing around a little bit. Just adding my 2 cents. I think that the missing piece here is around provision capacity versus consumed capacity, and I think that is the question. If I read it correctly, I could be wrong. Prachi, just help me out there. But I think what Christopher said in the chat is correct. If this is to see how much available capacity you have, that does not reflect necessarily directly in the metrics app or in the Azure billing statement. That is something you have to work out in between.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And apologies if I butcher some names. It's going to happen. People butcher my name. I'm going to butcher your names. That's just how it works. So Marina, I saw your question. What is the best method to estimate capacity needs for Spark workloads? I might send that over to you, Łukasz.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. So Spark is a great workload because it's very variable. So this challenge of estimating how much CU is going to consume is actually quite difficult. It depends heavily on what you put in your notebook, how often you run it, and the sophistication of the transforms you're doing, right? And you can do quite substantial amount of CU. So the baseline that I would say right now is we have a feature, we call it Autoscale billing for Spark. If you go into your capacity settings, you can turn that on and you can allocate how many CUs you would like to use. And then what will happen is when you run your Spark notebook, you'll be billed directly for that execution, independent of the provision capacity. So if you're just getting started and you don't know how much provision capacity you really need, and you're going to be a heavy Spark user, what I would do is I would just start out with like an F2 capacity, something very modest, and then add Autoscale billing to it. Run the notebooks, do some math, use the metrics app to understand how many CUs you're going to be consuming on a regular basis, estimate your usage pattern, and then decide, does it make sense to, provision a specific SKU? Could be an F4, F32, whatever that might be, to cover most of your compute usage. And then if you do need, you can always continue to use Autoscale billing for Spark as a way to be fully dynamic when it's much harder to estimate. Hopefully that helps.
Can I add to that and say one thing that Killian mentioned earlier in the call when I was doing his intro is For folks who are like completely new to Fabric, completely new to Spark, we do have the SKU estimator that sort of allows you to at least have an idea of what direction to head. So everything Wakash described is completely right if you have it already and you kind of want to estimate. But if you're starting off and you've never been on Fabric, you could go on the SKU estimator, which is an online calculator. You can put in what you think would be your data volume, number of SPAC jobs, frequency, other workloads you might have, and it kind of spits out an estimated SKU for you. And then if you use that, you can track it in capacity metrics and see what your progress is and do some kind of basically modeling your workload. And then if all of that fails, and if you have, maybe jobs that are a little bit, unpredictable, then you can also do Spark Autoscale, like Wakash rightly mentioned. So there is a journey to sort of help you to get there where you're able to predict and manage this a little bit better.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we actually have a demo of the SKU estimator as well. There's a bunch of questions in the chat, so I don't want to spend that time on that yet. But if you do want to see that demo, just pop it in the chat, and we'll run it soon. Andreas, I want to ask you a question, and this is something that I didn't actually cover in my slides, but comes up a lot, which is how does kind of the Power BI licensing work with Fabric licensing? Do I still have to think about Power BI licensing now that we're in this new Fabric world?
So yeah, I mean, I'm not the PM on this, but I can definitely tackle this one. So from a Power BI perspective, obviously, if you're an author, if you're publishing Power BI artifacts, you will need a Power BI Pro license, so it's still relevant. There is a SKU threshold where if you have deployed capacity, like an F-64 deployed, you will not need the Power BI Pro license to consume any of the Power BI artifacts that are hosted under that capacity in those workspaces. But yeah, it does still matter.
Awesome. And yeah, I know a lot of folks are kind of moving over from P-SKU to F-SKU as well. We have certainly, if you're going through that and you have some questions, we can certainly answer those as well. I know that's been a concern for some. Okay, Scott asks, are there background jobs that get run interactively still regarded as background? And I might send that over to you.
Sorry, I might actually turn this one on to Lukash. You said a background job, because this is his area. Yeah, I'll just pause and let him respond to this.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, when we talk about interactive versus background, we really mean what kind of work is it doing, right? So for example, I might go and have a data flow, and that data flow is doing a substantial amount of work. It's doing a bunch of ETL, transforming data and loading it into some system. That's a really big operation. So what we do in Fabric is we try to make those big operations have very little impact on your capacity. And so we run those operations as background jobs, and we classify them that way, and they get smoothed over 24 hours, which substantially decreases the impact on your capacity at any point in time. And we do that regardless of whether that's run on a schedule, so through like a schedule picker or some API, or whether it's done through the UI where you press a button to run that job. Because that job is a background job, it'll always run with that background designation. And so what we do is for scheduled refreshes, ad hoc refreshes, data flow executions, Spark notebooks, I think just about every data warehouse query and a lot of others, they're all classified as background, and they'll always run as background. It's only in the Power BI space where sometimes queries might run both interactive or background, but typically, and there in the Power BI space, it's that if you run a query through a report that you're viewing, that's going to be an interactive one. But if a query is executed through a scheduled refresh, for example, it might be considered as background. Hopefully that helps.
That's great. We have another question from the Weber family. Are there any rules of thumb for, say, 800 workspaces on a shared capacity, about 6,000 active users, and what is a required SKU for that? For example, a PPU workspace can easily exhaust an F128. Any comparable guidelines? I might send that over to you, Andreas. And you're speaking on mute. is the problem we
Sorry,
all have.
yeah, sorry about that. So let's just say, so this is specifically for a Power BI workload. So we're saying, what was the driver? 6,000 users.
Yeah, about 6,000 users, about 800 said for 800 workspaces on a shared capacity. What would be the required SKU? And I think you can kind of take this more broadly of just how do I think about my SKU size, right?
Yeah, so the one thing is obviously the interactive workload. Like there's some guidance around that. So in the estimator tooling, there's space to put in your user cohort, and that will drive a certain baseline level of consumption that we estimate for those workloads. The other portion, and this is the one that's going to drive create some of these like entry-level gates for what capacity size you need to operate within, is the actual model sizes. So the Power BI data models. So what we recommend you do is you look at your model, like your Power BI data models, and you say the biggest one you've got, and you put that in. We have an entry for that in gigabytes. So if you have a 10 gigabyte model, you're going to require I'm forgetting the gate, but you're going to require like an F-32 or something to operate at 10 gigabytes. But yeah, for 6,000 users, if we look at the tooling, this is an F-2056, roughly, based on the user count. So 256 capacity units to operate those. That's roughly what we estimate. And
awesome.
we do take some overhead, or we do take a bit of a pessimistic view on the sort of the user base, so we don't make a rough order of magnitude that either going to be very underestimated or overestimated. So this is kind of what we see. But every use case could be different, and this is unfortunately in data engineering and data in analytics land, the phrase "it depends" often comes in. And this is where this is a good starting point to give you a budgetary estimate out, and then you start working with it and see how it transpires once you get your individual workloads in it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Like we can give a recommendation through all those steps, but that the rubber meets the road when your users are actually using it, and you try and figure out how many, how much usage those users are using. Maybe they love it and they're using every day. Maybe you have to do some groundwork to actually kind of spread that usage. So obviously it is worth rethinking what SKU size you have after you start using it for a couple months. And also, if you're looking for the SKU estimator that Andreas is talking about, just search Fabric SKU Estimator. It should pop right up. If you can't find it for whatever reason, it's on the pricing page too. So, or at least a link to it is on the pricing page. So you can go to the Fabric pricing page, and you'll find it right there. Okay, we have a couple questions related to the Capacity Metrics app. The Weber family asks, when will chargeback reporting be released? And the second question, which we can kind of do as a part two, is Scott asked, would you please make the data model for the Capacity Metrics app open? Last time I looked, some of the tables and/or calculations were not visible, making it hard to create my own visualization. So let's start with, when will chargeback reporting be released? Opie, since Chris isn't here to answer those questions, I'm hoping you can take these on.
Sure, happy to take this one because it's good news. I believe we actually already have chargeback chargeback reporting in public preview. So this is something that it's a separate app by itself that you need to download, which is probably why people might not notice it. I'm going to try to find a link and add it in the group chat here, but it is available, and we already have customers who are using this and giving feedback. And it basically allows them to be able to apportion a certain usage or percentage on the capacity to different departments or different cost centers and things like that, right? That way, they're able to divide up the costs when they get their Azure bill. So yeah, it is available in public preview, which is great news. In terms of,
if I can jump in,
please.
Just real quick. So Pankaj Ora published the URL. So it's in the chat right now. So you can go grab it, and the instructions on how to get it are all in there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And then the second question was around how do we make the data model and capacity metrics available to other folks? So we've been working on a feature called Capacity Events by RTH for a couple of months now. The idea behind this feature is that it allows you to have access to near real-time telemetry stream that exposes the same data that we use in the capacity metrics app. And it's supposed to be low latency. You have programmable access. You can build your custom routing capabilities on top of this. We are currently in a very limited private preview right now, but we're hoping to get to a public preview soon so that we can have more people trying this out. There's some kinks we have to work out on our end to make sure that the data available is consumable, that it's actually useful for folks to be able to make decisions. And that's just something that we've been working through. So please bear with us, but we're really excited about this. I think we've talked about it at the last 2 FabCons right now. So folks are probably wondering, when is this coming? But we are working very hard to get it out. Let me pause and see if Wukash, Andres wants to add anything to that.
No, I think it's a really cool feature. And so when we put the capacity events in Real-Time Hub, what that means is that you can build really sophisticated processes, whether that's alerting over top of the data, automatic management of the capacities. So we're super excited. Obviously, it's still not yet publicly available, but we're excited for that journey. And unfortunately, just for context for the metrics app model, that model is very sophisticated, and we have to balance the availability of the data and the scalability underlying systems, right? And so we just that's why we haven't done it. So I know that's a frustration for some customers, and if you really want access to the data, that is a challenge. But the new Real-Time Hub story is going to be so much superior. It'll be a supported interface. You'll be able to build and depend on that data when it comes through.
I just want to plus one, Lukash, on that one. It's one of those really hot features that most of my customers come and chase me down. I want to keep my my consumption and through a stream, and being able to run activator jobs to automation to scale up and scale down, or tweak configurations so I don't start X amount of pipelines and Spark jobs. This is a really, really cool feature.
Yeah, plus one to that. We have a question in the chat from Jonas, and I knew this was coming at some point. This is for you, Wukash. Are there any plans to bring auto-scaling to Fabric capacities like in Power BI Premium?
Yes, it's a hot topic of discussion internally. So yes, we are looking to provide a solution to giving you some flexibility, especially we know that customers who have large amounts of users, like at Monday morning when everyone logs in and goes to look at their analytics, they can encounter some throttling. And so we want to provide a solution for F-SKUs that allows it to handle those kind of like surges without throttling. Is it going to be exactly like P-SKU Autoscale? The answer is no. We're looking at a similar solution, but different. And the details I can't share right now, but it is something that we are actively working on.
Yeah, I think Wukash and Opie and I are in almost daily meetings about things like that. So absolutely, it's certainly on our minds as well to make sure that you aren't throttled and when you have those mission critical capacities that you can't be throttled. So all right, we have another question from Prachi, which is it a best practice to downgrade capacity during non-working hours and scale it back up during job hours? I'm guessing Wukash, you can jump in, but please, anybody else who wants to jump in as well.
Yeah, I can definitely jump in. So just a couple of things about scaling capacities, right? So scaling capacities does help you save costs in some cases, right? And that's typically why customers go down this approach, that they want to optimize their spend. Now, it's not that simple always to know when's the right time to scale down and whatnot. So what we generally recommend is first, do try to right size your capacity, right? Like the customers that are the most successful just generally have a capacity, they let it run, especially if you purchase an RI, it's quite economical to do that. And then you don't have to spend a lot of time managing or actively tweaking your capacity, which is some overhead for you. The second thing is that sometimes when you have specific times of the month, for example, at the beginning of the month or the end of the month, like month close or quarter close, sometimes there are legitimate reasons that there's just going to be much more capacity usage. And in those situations, it makes total sense to scale up your capacity and scale it down to accommodate those things. So we generally do encourage customers to take a look and make sure that they've got a reasonably sized capacity. Now, scaling capacity isn't something that you should take lightly, because what it does is it can stop all the jobs that are running, and then those jobs need to be restarted, right? So it's so making this a off hours or a planned thing at specific times of the month makes sense. Doing it on a minute-to-minute basis is definitely not something that you should be doing. One last thing, when you do resize your capacity, if you're scaling it down, any of the smoothed usage that's still in the previous capacity level, it can affect your throttling limits. So as you're doing these scaling gestures, double check that you're below 50% on your utilization and below 50% on your throttling charts in the metrics app before you go ahead and scale down. Otherwise, you might have a issue with delays or rejections.
Can also add something to that. You should also consider your use cases. So let's say you have a playground, like a data science playground or sandpit capacity that you've deployed. For the level of mic, run that at micro SKU, if you have no activity on it, right? Or pause the capacity, it doesn't really matter. But those ones are really good use cases where, hey, I now have a project that's going to require a lot of compute to complete, scale it up to whatever it is, and then shut it down. That makes sense. The other thing is when you on the right sizing part, it's also important to think about like your interactive workspaces and workloads versus your background operations, like your data engineering workloads and your pipelines on that. So it's really important to, well, at least I see this, that's what most of my customers to try to do on purpose design for how you deploy capacity and for what workspaces, what purposes. Because that will help you, if you have one big capacity and now you need to scale it up to deal with the temporary demand, you're effectively doubling your capacity, and that can be really nasty, both financially and can have other consequences as well.
Nice work, both of you. You actually answered, I only asked Prachi's first question, but you answered the second one as well. So really comprehensive. I love it. Scott asked, what is the last update date for the estimator available to MS partners? I assume you're asking just like, when is it available? It's available right now, actually. But Andreas, you might have more to add.
Sure. So this is, I think this is on the predecessor to the web-based estimator. So we had a partner-based estimator that we were sharing with solutions integrators and GSIs. There is no real future roadmap for that one that has transitioned into the web-based estimator. We are going to make some improvements to the web-based estimator so it will function, or you'll have more, well, you will have a little bit more granular control, and also being able to do some other things with it that makes it a bit more useful for multi-estimates and that sort of thing. But this is what we've got in the backlog, and we're sort of trying to figure out how we can make it more of a detailed tool when needs be, and not, because that is, I guess, what a lot of partners and are sort of missing from the web-based tooling. It's very, very simplified.
Awesome. We have a question from Marina that's similar to the kind of Spark question we asked earlier, Ukash, which is, for Synapse users with predictable Spark consumption, is there an extrapolation? Oof, man, ask me a hard to pronounce word of this early in the morning, or heuristic for estimating on equivalent capacity? The SKU estimator lacks any parameters around Spark usage specifically.
Yeah, so first off, Marina, thank you for highlighting this. I think we'll take this back and see what we can do to make the estimator a little bit more complete, because I think that's a gap. So I personally don't have a rule of thumb that I can share. I think it would be great if you just connected with us offline and we can see if we can get someone who's an expert in Synapse to give you a little bit of a helping hand. So feel free to reach out. I think so. My contact information is out on LinkedIn. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'll be happy to connect with you and direct you to a person that can help you.
All right, another question is there a way to export Fabric Metrics app or Chargeback app data older than 30 days? And Opie, I might add you to this one.
Sure, happy to do that. So by default, the Fabric Metrics app and the Chargeback app, they only retain data for the last 30 days. We know that this is a limitation, and that's the reason why we have the capacity events in our TH feature that we're planning to release soon, which is going to allow people to be able to have access to, near real-time telemetry stream that they can export and use by themselves. That being said, I have seen people walk around this 30-day limit of the Chargeback and Metrics app feature. Specifically, given that, the reports in Capacity Metrics app are basically Power BI reports, I've seen people who can connect to the app semantic model and like Power BI desktop, for example, and then create a custom report that queries the data daily. And then they store the results externally in some kind of Lakehouse or SQL DB or OneLake, and then they use it to sort of build a historical view. We've seen customers do that. Is this something we'd recommend? Not really, because it wasn't designed that way. But I've seen people try to work around that temporarily until we get to the point where we're able to actually give you the capacity events in RTH, Real-Time Hub, so that you can actually build your custom models on top of that.
I've got a feedback on that too. There are some community projects, and I see that this is being mentioned in the chat. So Fume or Fume, however you pronounce it, that project does have some built-in logic to store long-term, I believe. Again, this is based on data feed out of the metrics app data feed. So it's not a first-party tool from Microsoft, and it would be probably recommended if you want to harvest consumption data for long term to rather wait for the metrics events, because they will be long term reliable.
All right, well, I was worried we were running out of questions, but we got a bunch more in. Thank you all again for asking your questions. You guys are making this event amazing. So Aaron asks, what is a good practice to handle a scenario when background compute is consistently around 70 to 80% of capacity, but billable storage is at 100%? Andreas, Wukash, either one of you want to jump in here?
So compute is consistently at 70% consumption, but billable storage is at 100%. Is this an F? Because storage is built based on consumption or how much you use. It's a dynamic.
Right. There's no limit as far as I understand.
Yeah, there's no limit on billable storage. So it's interesting to hear like where the billable storage is at 100%. So yeah,
it might be good.
I think maybe we need to do a little follow-up on this one, right? Like if you're having issues with it, then maybe a support case might be interesting, right? Because like these are notoriously difficult to give recommendations without digging into the details. We don't see this happen very often, if at all, and we don't see it affecting folks. One thing that can affect folks is the amount of storage you're entitled to in a capacity can vary based on the licenses that you have, right? So we give sometimes you can run into limits on a per user basis where you've run out of your gigabytes allowed per user. But that's a very edge case for most organizations. And Andreas?
Yes, I see Aaron just pasted F8. So I'm assuming he's mentioning, or he's thinking about Power BI, the model store, or how big the models can be run. So this is in-memory compute model size.
Okay. Okay, that's a difference. So yeah, so each SKU has, and I know there was another question about it actually earlier as well, is that each SKU has certain built-in, scalability limits. And those limits include how many concurrent users you have, how much memory you can use, how many rows you can process. And one of those is this limit on the size of data models. So for example, some SKUs only allow you 10 gigabyte models, whereas other SKUs allow you larger ones. So if you are running into those limits and that's the issue, then you would need to move to a SKU that can accommodate the size of workload that you have. And then what you'll see is that you'll see, like in this particular situation, the background utilization will decrease, which is normal because you're then able to process the larger amounts of data or handle the larger amounts of concurrency.
Another recommendation with bold sizes.
Andres, you're on mute again.
Oh, don't, nope.
No, you sound good.
Yeah. Another thing on the model sizes, if you're having issues processing your data models or getting, your data models thrown away or thrown out when you're processing, my recommendation is always go through Chris Webb's blog posts and look at his best practice guides. They are gold, and they will help you identify things like silent failures that causes weird scaling issues when that forces you to run out of memory. So yeah.
All right, we have actually another question on from AMC. Not sure if you're AMC movies, but I love your movies if you are. One of the most common questions I get from new customers is how to determine the right SKU. Now we've talked about the SKU estimator a few times, but Larissa, I'm wondering if we could put my my screen back on the overall share my screen again, so we could just play a quick demo, because I think that would help, right? This is fairly new, and we want to make sure people have seen this. So let me quickly play this. Only about 45 seconds.
Microsoft Fabric offers a comprehensive pricing page where customers can explore the costs associated with different SKUs and select their preferred regions. However, many customers face challenges in determining the right SKU for their specific needs. To simplify this process, we have developed a SKU Estimator tool that delivers precise capacity recommendations tailored to your unique requirements. For instance, consider a scenario where you have a data set of 100 gigabytes and execute one daily batch operation across 10 tables. Additionally, imagine a data science team consisting of 30 scientists working on 50 models. Using the SKU estimator, these requirements are analyzed efficiently, and it determines that an F-64 SKU would be the optimal choice.
All right, so it just gives you a quick overview of it, but definitely check it out for yourself. I know it's changing a lot, constantly as we bring out more and more features to it. But great way to kind of just start off, determine your right SKU. All right, we do have a question from Scott on licensing. If I have a customer that reserves a given amount of capacity, say an F-34, and 6 months later adds another F-32 reservation, so that they have multiple reservations, and they have multiple expiration dates, is there a way to help get all of those expiration dates aligned, perhaps during annual enterprise licensing amnesty? Andreas, I'll put this over to you.
So obviously, if you're moving from premium capacity to F-SKU, then obviously aligning them to your renewal dates is obviously something you have to do contractually. In terms of best practices there, we obviously allow you to run, there's a grace period when you're cutting over to F-SKU, where you can still run your P-SKU so that you don't immediately have to migrate the workloads or run any of those sort of migration assistance. But sorry, I lost my train of thought there. It is, contractually you have to align them, but it's probably recommended to at least plan ahead a little bit ahead of time, because there will be scenarios where you have to think about certain artifacts migrating. There's geographical restrictions. There might be some some specific scenarios that need to be dug through. But if you reach out to Lukash and the team on LinkedIn, and they can funnel to the correct people that can have this conversation with you.
Yeah, and to
Awesome.
extend on that,
I can-
there's
Yeah.
in the Azure licensing space, there is a way to do this. So if you need it and you can't find out how to do it just by searching online or reaching out to us on LinkedIn, just please go ahead and file a support case for the billing, and they'll be able to walk you through it, because there is a process to basically take your RIs and synchronize the end dates. That would mean that you would extend, I think, to the latest end date for all your RIs, but there is a process to go do that.
Is that what you were going to add, OP, as well?
Yeah, I think I was gonna say, I read the question as like, is there a way to do this like automatically? Like when you purchase, say, an F-32 and then later you add one more, is there a way to do this, alignment of dates automatically? And I think the short answer is it doesn't happen automatically, but there are options around it, like Wokash and Andrea said, right? So for example, I think Andrea's mentioned, if you're somewhere in your enterprise agreement renewal window, during that annual renewal window, you can often consolidate and restructure your reservations. You can work with Microsoft account team members that can help you with that. We also have this thing called like a capacity buyback or exchange program, where you could return and then use that. You could return what you have, like any unused reservations, and then buy a fresh new reservation that start at the same time so that it can end at the same time, right? And there's also like the manual coordination with the Azure team, with Wokash alluded to. So there are ways around it, but none of them are like automatic. And I wanted to sort of mention, we have gotten this request before from a lot of customers, especially during FabCon. This came out, and this is on our backlog of things to look at of, is there a way to make this a little bit easier for our customers? So we do hear that feedback here.
And so OP said the magic word, and I was struggling to recall it off the top of my head. It's called an exchange. So if you actually go and you search in Bing or your favorite search engine for cancel, exchange, or refund reservations, you should see under the cost management and billing area in the Fabric capacity documentation, a whole section on how to go do that. So you're looking for a self-service exchange is what you're looking for.
Awesome. There's actually a question for me, which is fun. So could you please share a retail customer story involving 8,000 users, I assume, for a customer, that we can help convince our client? I would just say to that, Prachi, there is something called customers.microsoft.com. You can search all the different Fabric customers stories for you. We have a couple that we often like to use for retail scenarios. I don't know if it meets that exact like 8,000 users point, but it might get close. And feel free to just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Killian Mitchell, I work at Microsoft. There's not that many Killian Mitchells in the world. So you can probably find me pretty quick. Just add me and I can probably send you a couple to use. But yeah, just for any customers in general, if you're like interested in what other organizations have done with Microsoft Fabric, we're putting out new customer stories on a monthly basis. So check customers.microsoft.com. You can find a bunch of really good examples of what customers have done with Fabric, and also the other tools that they've integrated with Fabric, say AI Foundry. They're building custom agents using data from Fabric to AI Foundry or Copilot Studio, or they've connected their Azure databases to Fabric. So you get all of these like really good implementations to consider when you're thinking about Fabric. All right. So I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. While we give people some time, I do have some other questions that I want to throw out that we often get. One of them is for you, OP, is when you're thinking about purchasing a SKU, we often, tell customers to really consider one-year reservations to get that 44% discount. But have you seen scenarios in which it might make sense for a customer to maybe start out with PayGo or stick with PayGo, and what are those scenarios?
Sure, absolutely. So I think customers choosing between like a PayGo and a reserved capacity instance, it really depends on what's their workload pattern, what is their budget and flexibility, what is their plan in the short term and the long term. Generally speaking, for pay-as-you-go options, what it allows you to do is you don't have any upfront commitment. So you only pay for what, the capacity that you use, right? It's ideal for like sporadic, unpredictable usage. You can pause and resume the capacity. You can even scale up or down as needed, right? In a reserved capacity instance, this is more if you have gotten to a point where your workload is more predictable, it's more consistent. You have a fixed monthly amount. Let's say you have a budget that you're trying to stay within. So you have that budget and you're able to use it. You can pay monthly or upfront. It is ideal for workloads that run 24/7 or close to it. And the big advantage here is you get a discount, somewhere between the 40%, maybe up to 60% range for some customers. You get that if you have the reserved capacity instance, right? So what I tell people really is it really depends on what is your risk for flexibility versus inflexibility. Do you have irregular versus regular workloads? What is your variable spend versus fixed spend? Going through that motion in your company and making a decision on where you are usually allows you to be able to make an informed decision whether you should go pay as you go or go reserved capacity instance.
That's perfect. That's exactly, that's incredibly helpful. Ukash, I actually have a question for you, and we've really kind of bounced around it. We've talked about it a little bit, especially with what's potentially coming in the future. But if I'm an organization and I have a mission critical workload, and what I mean by that is a workload that I absolutely need 100% uptime on, I can't have it go down for any reason, especially throttling. Are there ways in which I can use some of the tools maybe we've talked about before, maybe there's some other tools to just help ensure that I don't necessarily run into some throttling issues on that capacity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Killian. So a couple of things. First off, actively monitoring your metrics, right? We find a lot of organizations, they set up a capacity and then they forget about it. They don't check their capacity metrics app ever. And then they run into throttling after organic growth of usage, right? So number one is make sure that you're actively monitoring. Weekly is typically pretty good. You can set up the reports and give access to your team. So that's number one. Number two is if you have a mission critical solution, you need to be able to identify what that is. And often the right choice is to have a capacity that's dedicated to that solution or to that class of mission critical solutions. What we find a lot, earlier we talked about this capacity that has 8,000 users. How do you manage it? Well, what happens in those capacities is at first it's a lot of ad hoc usage, but over time, maybe 6 months, 12 months later, someone is depending on that capacity to run their business. And then what happens is if there's any kind of throttling on that capacity, they get out of whack. So what you would do is you would have, for example, a process where you can have an office hours or you can have a alias that you run and people can say, hey, this is a mission critical solution. Or you could be monitoring that in the metrics app to see how many users are using specific reports or specific workspaces to say, oh my gosh, there's 100 people or 1,000 people using this particular report. That's probably a mission critical one. Let's go and figure out how we manage the quality of service for that actively. So do think about that. The other thing that you can do is with surge protection, which is now generally available, as Killian mentioned earlier, you can help protect interactive users from overuse by background jobs. So highly encourage you to turn that on so that when capacity is scarce, you can still make sure that users have access to the analytics that they need. So between monitoring, making sure that you have the right mix of capacities, like a dedicated capacity for mission critical, having processes for identifying and then managing actively the quality of service, and then using tools like surge protection will help you. One other thing that some organizations also need, we touched on it earlier, when there are periods of the month or periods of the calendar that are particularly intense, like sometimes it's around, tax season, sometimes it's around the end of the fiscal year, sometimes it's just month close or the start of the month or critical milestones that you might have. You can expect a larger load. In those situations, do try to plan ahead, and if you need, scale up the capacity temporarily and then scale it back down to stay ahead of any kind of quality of service issues that you might have.
Love it. Andreas, Opie, anything to add? If not, I think we have time for one other question. Actually, this question is for you. We have 2 minutes left, so you might have to go a little quicker because it's a big question. But Andreas, I might start with you actually, which is, I'm a Power BI premium customer, say, and I'm thinking my renewal is coming up. I know I have to move over to F-SKU. What kind of grace period do I have? How does that transition work? What do I need to migrate? What are kind of the top things to keep in mind as I'm moving from my Power BI premium over to Fabric? And I know this is a big topic for a lot of us that we work on.
So, so in terms of the migration from the P-SKU to the F-SKU, if memory serves me right, and I apologize if I get this wrong, but someone can correct me here, I do believe we give you 90-day grace period to cut over. That is, in terms of some of these projects, if you got very complex projects where you have a lot of Power BI capacities that you're migrating, we recommend that you start planning ahead at least like 3 to 6 months before this grace period, because there is going to be actual effort or work involved here. It's not. It's easy to just stand up the capacity and go and reassign it in a workspace, but you might hit issues like geographical, like cross geography issues, or certain artifacts that can't be migrated easily to these capacities. So also, if you're not planning ahead, the opportunities of consolidating, also you might not get that right, and it might end up with too much reserved capacity in the end when you're doing these cutovers.
Just wanted to. Oh yeah, go ahead. Did you finish, or did I?
Yeah. I was just gonna I was gonna hand over and see if there's anything else.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to that in terms of the grace period. So there's a little bit of nuance there where you do get 90 days of full Power BI data access, right? That allows you sufficient time to be able to move your workspaces over, etc. However, in terms of days of free Fabric capacity usage, that is 30 days. The first 30 days, you get free Fabric capacity usage. So that way you're basically having access to double the capacity at the same time. But within those 30 days, the hope is that you have already made your purchase to be able to move to the F-SKU. And assuming you have a seller that you're working with, you've made a commitment to buy, etc., you will continue to have access. We're able to sort of extend that grace period. If, however, you have not made a purchase, made a contact with the seller, or in the process of negotiations, etc., after 30 days, you might start to experience some form of performance degradation where some of your requests could get delayed or somewhat rejected. Typically, when customers experience that and reach out to us about that, we're very gracious. We're like, hey, sure, work with someone and let us help you get over to an F-SKU. But we're trying to avoid is a situation where we have people who abuse the grace period on the process. And we have seen that, unfortunately. We're a big company where they have no intent to make a purchase. They just have the grace period and like use it and then like just never move on to making a purchase. So we do have those checks and balances in place to ensure that people actually get past the grace period and make a purchase. And we give lots of liberties and times for people who need a little bit more time to be able to get there.
Yeah,
I
think. Sorry, final thing. I think the what OP is like really trying to communicate, and it's just speak to us, speak to your account team, speak to your partners,
Yep.
and we will be happy to help you out and come up with a solution for you.
Agreed.
Definitely. And Pankaj like added a good link to the chat too, so definitely check that out. It has a ton of information on all of this. With that, I know we're 2 minutes over, so number one, I want to thank everyone who joined us today, asked some amazing questions. Thank you all so much for engaging with us, talking with us. Like it's a pleasure to actually get to those questions firsthand. Also, thank you to everybody who joined us on camera. Opie, Wukash, Andreas, thank you so much. And thanks to everybody in the chat also who joined. I know there's a bunch of you, Christopher, Pankaj, Paul, and so Asante, thank you so much for everybody who helped out with this event. And with that, I think we can end the call. Awesome.
Thanks, Julian.
Thanks everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today in our session. Before we head over, we are always looking to improve our sessions and your experience here at the Reactor. So if you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find the link in the screen or in the chat. We'll see you in the next one.